Hi guys, I want to talk to you today about the EASA or EASA Prototype Commission Regulation on Unmanned Aircraft Operations. So what the heck is that? Well, first of all, EASA is the European Aviation Safety Agency. That's like the sort of European version of the CAA, if you like. And over the last however many years, they've been taking power away from the national aviation authorities, CAA in our case, and centralising that in Brussels. And then what is a prototype rule? Well, you might think that's rules about building prototype aircraft, but it's not. It's prototype means sort of draft in this case, final draft actually in this instance. You might say, well, I'm not really interested in this. We've voted out of Europe, so why am I interested in European rules? Well, unfortunately, these rules are going to come in. I was at a meeting yesterday with DFT and CAA, and these rules will come into the UK. We'll adopt them one way or another. They will be UK rules. So, are they good? And the answer to that, I think, is no. They don't really do anything for us as hobbyists or as sort of consumers. If you consider yourself a consumer, you just want to go and buy a drone and fly it. You don't necessarily want to be a member of an association or fly at a club site or anything like that. You just want to use, a cool piece of equipment. Maybe you're a photographer and you use this as another piece of photography equipment. So here, this is the Prototype Commission Regulation on Unmanned Operations. It's 72 pages. There's also another document which is 16 pages long, which is kind of a bit of an explanation as to why they've written what they have. There was a previous version called the Technical Opinion, came out a few months ago, and some of what they said they were going to do in there hasn't happened, and they sort of tried to explain some of that in this explanatory document. One of the things, for instance, was model aeroplanes and model aircraft would be excluded, it said. And then in the explanatory document, they explain why they've put it in here, which is they couldn't find a satisfactory way to differentiate between a model aircraft and an unmanned aircraft, a drone, if you will. And because they couldn't find a satisfactory way to do it, they've kind of crowbarred model aircraft into these rules, even though they kind of weren't written for model aircraft. So I would encourage you to read both of those documents. They're not easy going, but there's a lot of jumping around. It references an appendix, and you have to go and look at what that appendix is, and then go back and read a bit further, and you have to go over here. But it's really important, I think, that we all understand and then tell the powers that be what we think about these rules, because I think they're going to cause us big problems when they come in. They're going to potentially completely destroy the UK drone market and probably the radio control model flying community as well, as they're written now. So how do you get hold of them? Well, if you Google EASA Prototype Regulation, you'll find it. You can also go to tinyurl.com/EASA Prototype, and you'll find them there. I'll put that in the description. So they're open to anyone. Anyone can download them and read them. And like I say, I would encourage you to do that, because don't take my word for it. Maybe you read them differently and you think they're fine, or maybe you pick up on something that I've missed. It's quite a long document, so I won't claim that I 100% understand it, every little aspect of it. So the more eyes on it, the better. But I will give you a little bit of an overview and some of the things that you might want to focus on that might encourage you to have a look as well. So there's 3 classes of operation in EASA's view: open, specific, and certified. Now, certified is sort of 737 size unmanned aircraft, and they're not really coming on as anytime soon, so EASA have said in this document they're not going to talk about them at all. So this document only concentrates on open and specific. The idea of open is that it's pretty much unregulated, so you can go and buy the aircraft and go and fly it, and you don't need to tell the authorities what you're doing, you don't have to ask for permission, you don't really have to do too much. You're given maybe a page of rules about that product, and you just crack on and do it. Now, the specifics are a bit different. That's maybe for commercial people, perhaps if you're flying in a built-up area, or you're flying a slightly more advanced aircraft, or you're doing something out of the ordinary, perhaps, then you would go and ask for a permission to do that. It's not clear yet whether that means every time you fly, or whether you get a permission like we do at the moment with a PFAW or a PIFCO now, which sort of gives you permission to go and do whatever jobs you like within your sort of operations manual and your skill level and all that kind of stuff. Or whether it seems to be written that it's like every flight, but you know, it can't really be, it's a bit impractical. So if we focus on the open, there's 4 classes: A0, A1, A2 and A3. Now A0 is the lowest class, so that's 250 grams or less. That's the only class where you can build your own, and it has to comply with the sort of stipulations that they're setting down. And the way this will work, apart from for that very small class where you can home build, is that these will be made by serious manufacturers in factories to comply with these A0, A1, A2 and A3 CE regulations. They're going to be sort of just like the current CE regulations for power output and for sharp edges and all that kind of stuff. Presumably the manufacturer will have to design and develop and manufacture that product, take it to a CE testing lab, and they will give it the stamp, and it will have a picture of a multi-rotor on it, and it will say A0 or A1 or A2 or A3. So first of all, looking at the A0, we've said it's under 250 grams. It's also limited to 50 meters of altitude. You're limited to flying at 50 meters of altitude, but also it's got to be electronically limited to 50 meters. It's also got to be electronically limited to 100 meters away from you. So I don't know of any aircraft on the market at the moment that has that kind of limitation, particularly in the sub 250 gram weight range. That sort of range, it's sort of toy territory, probably quite a relatively cheap product. Doesn't have GPS, so how could it tell how far away you are? Might have barometric, but not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily even have a barometric sensor. It's also limited to 54 kilometers an hour, 15 meters per second. So if you're thinking you might be able to build a racing drone and sneak it in under 250 grams, I think you'd be quite impressive if you did. But again, 54 kilometers an hour, you're not going to be very competitive in a race. So then we move up to A1. It's got to be factory built. Let me look at my whiteboard, because I was explaining this all earlier. So the first thing I notice is you've got to be registered. They're saying that to fly an A1, A2 or A3 you have to be registered. Now I think registration is crazy. I can't see that a terrorist or somebody who wants to use a drone to drop things into prisons or anything of that nature is going to bother to register. I can't believe that they're going to go and queue at the post office to get their registration certificate and clearly show it on the aircraft. Now, I've been told before by the government, shall we say, that there's two points to this. One, that it would generate revenue, and two, that the ministers have to be seen to be doing something. And I reject both of those, really, because I don't think it will generate revenue. I think unless you're going to charge a crazy amount, like £150 to register a drone, I can't see that, you know, charging someone £5 would cover its own costs. You're talking about setting up a sort of drone DVLA to administer these registrations, and I can't see that the £5 would cover the cost. Assuming there is a charge, of course. And the other argument that, what did I say? It would generate revenue and ministers have to be seen to be doing something. Well, I think ministers would be seen to be doing something, spending all this money setting up a drone DVLA, but when a drone crashes into a prison and they're not able to identify who it belonged to, the minister's going to look pretty stupid as well. So I don't support registration. We're already members of associations and things like that for insurance purposes, but you know, I don't see mandatory registration as required, really. And if you agree with me, you should definitely reply to this and tell them so. I'm going to be saying that a lot more in this video. But let's look at the other things that are in an A1, because that's just the first. So you've got to be at least 14 years old. You've got to, you've still got a 50 meters max altitude. And like I say, the aircraft has to limit you to that. You've also got this thing. Now the max weight, by the way, is 25 kilos. There's no limit between 250 grams and 25 kilos. At the moment, we've got a 7 kilo limit. We've also got a 3.5 kilo limit for the FPV exemption. So at the moment, we recognise that you know, there are different levels of weight that have different risks. In this document, though, they kind of use a different method, I suppose, which is a thing called the AIS, which is the abbreviated injury scale. I think that's right. And it's from the automotive industry, apparently, and it's sort of the way they estimate or rate how bad a car injury would be. An injury on a person who's been in a car accident. So we're saying on this one, to fall into the A1, you have to be, the aircraft has to pose a risk of AIS 2 or less. That's probably about it for that one. A2, if we move up to A2, and that's where the AIS estimate is more than 2 and less than 4, we then have to have registration again. We have to have geofencing now, and a lot of aircraft already have geofencing. That's kind of not a problem, but we have to understand what EASA mean by geofencing. They're talking about no drone zones, sort of controlled from Brussels, but what are these no drone zones, and what exactly do they mean by geofencing? And we need to be a bit careful, because we don't want to sort of think they mean what we've got at the moment, and then actually it means something a little bit different. And we also need to have a way to override that. I'm a strong believer of that, because I know a number of people who fly on airfields, maybe after hours. They've got the permission of the SATCO. In one case, the person I'm thinking of is the managing director of the airport, and he has the permission to be there. Another one uses drones for scaring birds off the runway, and we also I'm aware of the AAIB, which is the Air Accidents Investigation Branch, and they use their drone to investigate air accidents, which often happen on runways. So they need to be able to fly there. So there needs to be some way to override as well. The other thing, geofencing, let's move on to e-identification. So this is a new one. This is a system, supposedly, which will transmit your registration number, your type of operation, whether geofencing is enabled or not, and your current location, latitude and longitude. I think that's right, for those 4 things. And that's in flight, so I can interrogate your aircraft from the ground and know what you're up to and where you are and that sort of thing. Which again, I don't know of any drone on the market right now that can do that, and certainly no model aircraft that I know of can do that. So saying that all current model aircraft and all current drones are going to be illegal to fly and sort of worthless when these come in, when these rules come in. So that's quite a big thing, and it's no small task. You know, a typical drone racer, he's not going to have the carrying capacity or the technology on board, or certainly not a Watt 4 radio control plane. It's not going to have the facility to have any of these things, geofencing, for instance, and your e-identification and all that stuff built into a simple balsa aircraft is just not going to happen. Talks a bit about training. We've got self-training. One of the phrases they use here is that aircraft should not require to fall into this category, should not require third-party training. Well, I know a lot of drone racers who, and I don't know anyone who's had lessons to be a drone racer. But could you give that to a member of the public and say, there you go, fly that drone? I don't think you could. A racing drone would likely be crashed within a few seconds if you gave it to a random person off the street. So they've not had third-party training, but is it so simple that anyone can do it? No. There's an element of learning and skill and crashing, and a big element in racing, I'd say, to do that. So again, that's a bit rubbish in this document. So you're still limited to 50 metres on this one as well, which is 150 feet, by the way. You've also got to have return to home. It's also got to be built for minimum noise. So quite what that means, we don't really know. And then if we go up to A3, which is kind of the top category here, you've got to have registration, you've got to have geofencing, you've got to have e-identification, you've got to be at least 14, you've got to have training, you've got to keep it within visual line of sight. You can now go up to 150 metres, which is roughly 500 feet, 494 feet, I think. Altitude limitation 150 metres, so the aircraft itself won't let you go above 150 metres. Built for minimum noise, has a return to home, and also has no single point of failure. So we're now talking about a fully redundant system with 2 flight controllers, 2 GPS, 2 compasses, motors that if one goes down, the rest can take over. Again, I don't know of a system on the market that has all of these things. So everything we've got now is going to be defunct when these come in. So yeah, that's a brief overview. I've already talked for far longer than I expected, than I hoped to. But please have a read, get your head around it, and then please reply and get everyone you know to reply to the EASA reply address. Now, please, whatever you do, don't use a template letter or don't copy and paste what your friend sent to EASA. And be polite as well. I heard someone use the term, dear faceless bureaucrat. I don't think that will go down well. Be polite and courteous and give them your opinion. But don't use a template letter, because if we get 30,000 people to send a template letter, it will be counted once. That's one voice. If we get 30,000 people to send individual letters that are sort of custom written, then that will be 30,000 voices. So please do that. We've only got until mid-October. There's no specific date, it just says mid-October. So please get it in as soon as you can. The other thing is, we were quite successful, some of you already know this, in 2009 with getting our MPs to help us. So to cut a long story short, all the members which at that time was only about 50, wrote to their various MPs. 28 MPs wrote to the Chief Executive of the CAA and the Minister for Transport, stood up in the Houses of Parliament, in the House of Commons, and said, what are you going to do about this? And that got me a meeting with the Civil Aviation Authority, and over the next 9 months we negotiated an exemption, which is basically a change in the law to all intents and purposes, and every year since that's been renewed, and that's the only reason that FPV can be done in this country. So we have a precedent which that MPs can be helpful. So please write to your MP as well. Say that you're not happy about this. If you voted, well, it doesn't matter whether you voted. The country voted for us to be out of Europe, so that crazy over-the-top regulations like this weren't pushed over to us from Brussels, and that seems to be exactly what's about to happen here, even though the country voted for Brexit. So maybe that's a point you can make to your MP or your MEP, both if possible. So yeah, I think there's a lot in here that we don't want to accept, and we need to make EASA aware of that, and hopefully they'll soften it in the final version. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for talking for so long. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.